Welcome to English with Zenko Master. Get ready to learn something new today.
My name is Paki, and I was 22 when it all began. I lived in Mumbai with 2 roommates, a messy cupboard, and big dreams that didn't always make sense. I was studying literature and working part-time at a bookstore near Churchgate. I wanted to write a novel one day, one that could make someone cry and smile in the same paragraph. But more than anything, I wanted to feel something real, something that made my life bigger than just lectures, rent payments, and city trains packed with tired people. It started with a message. A silly, accidental message sent to the wrong number. "Are you joining us for dinner tonight?" I had meant to send it to a friend, but I typed the wrong last digit. The person replied, "Sorry, I think you have the wrong number." Normally that would have been the end of it, but for some reason, I said something back. I think it was, "Oops, my mistake. But maybe you should join us anyway?" I wasn't flirting. I was just bored, curious. Or maybe I was looking for a story to tell later. He laughed, and then he kept replying. His name was Anuj. He worked in Delhi in some tech company I'd never heard of. I asked him what he did all day, and he said, "Meetings, code, coffee, repeat." I told him he sounded like a robot. He told me I sounded like a storm. I don't know why we kept talking. Maybe because it was easy. Maybe because we didn't know each other, so we didn't have to pretend. The messages didn't stop. Days turned into weeks. I'd find myself checking my phone every few minutes, even in class, even while helping customers at the bookstore. Anuj had this way of turning everything into a small joke. Like when I told him about a rude professor and he said, "That's it. I'm sending you a fake award that says Best Eye Roller in Mumbai." I laughed more in those messages than I had in months. He didn't know it, but I was going through a lot then. My parents were fighting back home in Dehradun. My roommate was planning to move out, and I was behind on rent. I felt alone, even surrounded by people. But with Anuj, I could breathe. Our messages turned into late-night calls. I'd sit on the balcony, phone pressed to my ear, listening to his soft voice telling me stories about his college days, his dreams of quitting the tech world, his habit of writing poems no one ever read. He told me once that he didn't believe in love stories because they never lasted. I told him that was because he hadn't been in one yet. He was quiet for a long moment after that. One night, he asked if we could meet. I said yes before I thought it through. He flew to Mumbai the following weekend. I still remember standing outside the airport, heart pounding, wondering if this was a terrible idea. What if he looked at me and felt nothing? What if I didn't recognize the version of him from our messages? But the moment I saw him walking toward me, holding a tiny plant in his hands, he said it was for my balcony. I smiled like a fool. He was tall, not movie star handsome, but something about him felt warm, familiar, like I had known him forever. We spent 2 days walking around Marine Drive, eating street food and laughing at nothing. He didn't try to impress me. He just listened. Really listened. When he left, I felt a strange emptiness, like the city had grown quieter without him. After that, we started calling each other every day. He sent me handwritten letters and old-school mixtapes on a pen drive. He said he liked the sound of my name and called me his favorite storm. I began to believe in something again. Not in forever, maybe, but at least in now. We made plans for the future. Small things like trips to Manali. Bigger things like maybe living in the same city someday. He told his parents about me. I didn't tell mine. I wasn't ready yet. But slowly, something shifted. He didn't notice at first, but I did. The calls that once filled my evenings began to feel too long. The jokes started to feel repetitive. I still loved him, or maybe I loved the idea of him, but a part of me was changing. I couldn't explain it, not even to myself. I started going out more with friends, staying offline longer, and when he texted, I sometimes waited hours to reply. I told myself I was just busy. But deep down, I was trying to pull away without causing pain. He noticed, of course. One night he asked me, "Are we okay?" I lied. I said yes, because I didn't have the courage to say no, because I didn't want to hurt him. But not wanting to hurt someone doesn't stop the hurt from happening. Eventually, I told him I needed space. I remember sitting on the floor of my room, staring at the phone screen, heart racing, as I typed the words, "I need time to think about everything." He didn't reply for a while. And when he did, it was only one sentence. "I'll wait, no matter how long." I cried that night, not because I didn't love him, but because I did. And love shouldn't feel like a weight, but it did. It felt like a quiet guilt pressing on my chest. And the more he waited, the heavier it became. He kept writing, kept sending me things, books I liked, songs I'd once mentioned. And then came my birthday. I didn't answer his call. I didn't open the letter he sent, not at first. It stayed on my table for weeks, unopened. I was trying to create distance, trying to find myself again. But the truth was, I was scared of opening anything that reminded me how kind he was. Because kindness can feel like a mirror when you're no longer the same. That letter is still with me. I read it much later, after everything had changed, and it broke me because he wasn't angry. He was hopeful. He still believed we had a story worth saving. But I had already started closing that chapter. Before I share the rest of my story, could you please tell me where you're from? It gives me strength to know there's someone out there who listens to me, who understands me. It means a lot to me. When I think about those months, I remember them in flashes. Not like a movie you watch all the way through, but like a photo album where some pages are missing and others are stained with rain. I never officially ended things with Anuj. I never sent a final message or made a clean goodbye. I just stopped replying. One day turned into two turned into weeks, and before I realized it, we were strangers again. The worst part was knowing I did this, not because he deserved it, but because I couldn't face my own confusion. During that time, My life was loud. I focused on classes, applied for a writing internship in Bangalore, and tried hard to fill every empty space with work, people, or noise. I told myself it was better this way, that we were never meant to last forever. I even convinced myself that Anuj would move on quickly. He had his career, his friends, his poems. But one evening, while sitting at a cafe near my college, I overheard a girl at the next table say, "People don't wait. They just pretend they're okay." And something in me broke, because I knew Anuj wasn't pretending. He was actually waiting. It had been 3 months since we last spoke. Then one morning, I opened my mailbox and saw his name again. I stared at the envelope for a long time before tearing it open. His handwriting hadn't changed. It was still neat, careful, like someone who always wanted to be understood. Inside the letter, there were no questions, no blame. Just a quiet line that said, "I hope the world is being kind to you. I still believe our story had meaning." I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I folded the letter and put it away in my drawer, like everything else I had buried. By the end of that year, I moved to Bangalore for a writing fellowship. New city, new people, new mornings. But I carried old things with me, memories of Anuj, of our late-night calls, of the way he once made me feel understood even when I wasn't making sense. I tried dating again, once or twice, but every time I looked into someone else's eyes, I remembered how Anuj used to look at me, as if I mattered, not just to him, but to the world. I started writing more, essays, blogs, even the beginnings of a novel. And without meaning to, I kept drawing characters who resembled him, men who waited, who wrote letters, who stayed even when no one asked them to. He had become part of my imagination, not in a romantic way, but in a permanent way, like ink that doesn't wash off no matter how many times you scrub. Then came the news. It was a rainy morning. I had woken up late, made a cup of chai, and opened my email. One of my old college friends had forwarded a post from Facebook. "Pray for Anuj. He's in ICU. Road accident. Critical." For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I kept blinking at the screen, thinking I had read it wrong. But the words didn't change. I picked up my phone, called the number in the post. A man answered. It was one of Anuj's colleagues. He confirmed everything. The accident had happened late the night before on the Delhi-Gurgaon expressway. He had been returning from work. A truck lost control. He was hit hard. Severe head injury? They weren't sure if he'd survive the next 24 hours. I booked a flight immediately. I didn't pack properly. I didn't tell anyone why I was going. I just knew I had to be there. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was love. Maybe I was hoping for one last chance to say something I should have said long ago. When I reached the hospital, the waiting room was full. His family was there. His younger sister, his father, 2 of his closest friends. They didn't know who I was at first. But when I said my name, his sister's eyes softened. "Pahi," she said. "He wrote about you. in his diary, almost every day. I sat beside her. I couldn't speak. The ICU was cold and silent. I was allowed to see him for only 5 minutes. They warned me. He was unconscious, covered in wires, his face bruised and swollen. I nodded. I walked in. Nothing could have prepared me for that moment. He looked like someone else. Pale. Still. Quiet in a way I had never seen before. The boy who once sent me photos of his coffee foam and argued with me about poetry was lying there like a story paused at the wrong page. I walked closer. I whispered his name. He didn't move. But something happened to me in that moment. I realized I had been running all this time, not from him, but from the parts of myself that loved too deeply. I had left him because I was scared, because love is not just about the good moments. It's about staying when things get heavy, and I hadn't stayed. I touched his hand. It was cold. I leaned close and said, "I'm sorry, Anuj. I'm sorry for leaving, for disappearing, for not choosing you when it mattered." The machine next to him beeped, slow and steady. That was all. He stayed in a coma for 4 days. I stayed by his side every one of those days. I read him our old messages. I brought him the same old songs we once listened to. I even found the playlist he had made for me, a silly mix of love songs and instrumental jazz. I played it next to his bed, hoping some part of him could hear. On the 5th day, his fingers moved. The nurse called the doctor. The room filled with people. His sister cried beside me. I stood frozen, watching the small miracle I hadn't expected but had begged the universe for. He opened his eyes, not fully, not sharply, but enough to see the light come back into them, enough to know he was still here. Recovery was slow, painful. The doctors warned that he might not remember everything, that there could be changes. But when he looked at me and said my name softly, like it was something sacred, I knew he remembered the one thing that mattered. He remembered us. We didn't rush into anything after that. There were still wounds to heal, not just in his body, but between us. I told him everything, why I had disappeared, how I had doubted myself, how sorry I was for not being braver. He didn't interrupt. He just held my hand and said, "You came back. That's enough." But I knew it wasn't enough. I couldn't undo the hurt, but I could stay now. Fully, honestly, without fear. So I stayed. The hardest part wasn't the hospital. It wasn't the ICU or the sleepless nights watching his chest rise and fall, afraid it might stop. It wasn't even the long months of recovery that followed, though those came with their own quiet pain. The hardest part was learning how to be close again. Not because I didn't love him, but because love, after it's been broken, asks for something more than promises. It asks for patience and forgiveness and a kind of trust. that doesn't return all at once. Anuj left the hospital after 6 weeks. He walked out slowly, leaning on a cane, his steps uncertain but determined. I remember holding his hand like it was glass. I was terrified of hurting him, but even more terrified of letting go. He moved back in with his parents for a while. I stayed in Delhi too, found a room near his home, and visited every day. We didn't talk much in the beginning. We didn't need to. Some days we just sat on the balcony, listening to the birds and the traffic, letting the silence stretch between us without guilt. He was different now, not in a dramatic way, but in small, noticeable shifts. He forgot things sometimes, especially short-term details. He got tired quickly. He didn't read as fast as he used to, but he was still Anuj, still thoughtful, still the boy who made me laugh without trying, still the man who once wrote me a poem about a paper boat and said it reminded him of my heart, brave, floating, always searching. One afternoon, about 2 months after he left the hospital, we sat under a neem tree near his house. The sun was soft that day. He looked at me for a long time and said, "You don't have to stay, Pahi. I know I'm not the same." I didn't answer right away. I touched his wrist, where the skin had a scar from one of the surgeries. Then I said, "You were never supposed to stay the same. Neither was I." We never made a big decision. We didn't have a conversation where we said, "We're together again." It just happened, like a slow sunrise. One day at a time, one cup of chai at a time. I started writing again. This time, for real. I got a freelance job editing short stories. He helped me sometimes, pointing out grammar errors, suggesting better endings. We became a quiet team, rebuilding something that once fell apart, but now had stronger bones. But happy doesn't mean easy. Some nights, I'd wake up and find him staring at the ceiling. Other nights, he'd get frustrated while trying to read a full page of text, his head hurting halfway through. There were days he didn't want to talk. Days he pushed me away gently, not out of anger, but exhaustion. And I had to remind myself, again and again, that love is not measured by how perfect someone is, but by how much you are willing to stay even when it's hard. One evening, he gave me a small notebook. It was wrapped in old newspaper and tied with a string. "I can't write long letters anymore," he said. "But I wrote this when I could, over the weeks, for you." I opened it carefully. On the first page, he had drawn a single line. "You left, but you came back." The rest of the pages were filled with pieces, memories, thoughts, half-finished poems, things he never said out loud. One line read, "Even pain is easier to bear when you know someone will still love you afterward." Another, "I don't need a perfect ending. I just want one that feels honest." I held that notebook to my chest like it was made of gold. Time passed. We didn't go back to the way things were before, because that version of us was gone. Instead, we built something quieter, deeper. We didn't travel much. We didn't go to fancy restaurants or post smiling pictures online. But we had routines, morning walks, late night tea, books left half finished on the table, shared playlists, a list on the fridge titled Someday Places, all the cities we wanted to visit when we were ready. After 1 year, he asked me to move in with him. I did. No drama. No big announcement. I packed my books, my notes, my half-written novel, and moved into the small flat with cream walls and 2 windows that faced the sunset. And I felt more at peace than I ever had before. But stories aren't fairy tales. And even happy endings come with turns you don't expect. One morning, Anuj collapsed in the bathroom. Just like that. No warning. No time to prepare. I called the ambulance, my hands shaking. In the hospital, they told me it was a complication. Something related to his previous injuries. His body was strong, but not invincible. He went into surgery. They said it was risky but necessary. I sat alone in the waiting room, cold and shaking, holding the same notebook he had given me months ago. I flipped to the last page. There, written in his slanted, slow handwriting, were the words, "If I go, tell them I went loving you." He survived the surgery, but he wasn't the same again. The damage was deeper this time. His memory slipped further. He recognized me, but sometimes he forgot what day it was. He couldn't read for more than a few lines. He got confused in crowds. The doctors said it might improve, or it might not. We went home, together, and I became his memory. I reminded him of our favorite places. I read him the books he once loved. I played his old poems aloud. I told him again and again how we met, how we fell in love, how we found our way back. Sometimes he remembered on his own. Sometimes he smiled and said, "I don't know if this happened or if I dreamed it, but it makes me happy." That was enough. Years passed. People often asked me, "How do you do it? How do you stay so strong?" And I never had the right words. But inside, I knew this. When someone gives you their heart, even when it's broken, you don't walk away. You carry it. You protect it. You remember for them when they forget. Anuj passed away 3 years later. It was a peaceful morning. The sky was soft. Birds were singing. He had been weak for a while, but still smiled every time I brought him tea. That day, I found him in his chair by the window, holding the same notebook. He looked like he was asleep. I didn't cry at first. I sat beside him, held his hand, and read aloud from the notebook. The page with my favorite line, "You came back. That's enough." I buried him with that notebook.